Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Vortex. This was directed by Gaspar Noe. For years, Gaspar Noe has made the kinds of movies that kind of plunge you into the outer edges of the cinematic experience, and I think he tries to expand on it and create what feels more immersive and more virtual. Yes, he is brash, but I kind of love that he is shameless and that he just doesn't really care what a lot of people think about him. I really like that he rips away all of the civility and the structural formality of things, and he really dares to push his audiences and his actors, everybody, into just really, really rough areas and through depleted pleasure centers, and you might feel gutted and yet you're buzzing with a sort of glee. And I think it's the kind of thing that you can only really truly feel when you've had a breakthrough and you come out the other side truly changed, or where you feel more alive than you did before. And I don't know, I think there are really revelations that can come out of pain, and that makes pain a little bit more complex. But also revelation through the pursuit of creativity and meaning, through kind of deconstructing the facades that we have built around ourselves, that we've created in this reality. And of course, Gaspar Noe has really upset a lot of people because he has a love of the taboo subjects, for sure. But for somebody like me, I've always just, for whatever reason, I really connect to his movies. I really connect to the experiences. But I will say it came to a point after watching all of his films and the progression of his career, I began to worry a little bit about his insistence on kind of breaking the rules in the way that he does and constantly exploring more the psychedelic delirium for revelations, especially in regards to death, because it can become ironically predictable. With most people it wouldn't be, but for somebody like him who always does that sort of thing, you know, it starts to get a little bit repetitive. And around the time that I saw Climax, a movie that I absolutely adore, I started to kind of get this feeling of repetition. And then certainly when I saw Lux Aeterna, a film that I also like, not to the same extent, but, you know, I did worry about the future of his films, kind of running the risk of falling into this kind of cycle, losing that evolving perspective. For me, that is very essential in an interesting filmmaker. There is this weird kind of sweet spot between a life and death, where all the DMT is kind of shooting through the brain, supposedly. And I think perhaps he's gotten a little bit too comfortable in that headspace, ironically, or interpreting that headspace in a specific way. And so what do you do to keep yourself fresh, you know, as an artistic person? Well, I think you reinvent yourself again. And he's certainly done that, I think. He's taken a sharp turn in a very different direction that is shockingly subtle. I think Noe did the thing that nobody really expected him to do at all, and that is make an intimate film, and one that doesn't have any like epileptic light shows and no like LSD-induced orgies. Really none of that. But here he is exploring more the death experience, as he has many times, but just from a little bit of a different perspective, with a different type of tone here. It's old people, two old people, and one has dementia. And, you know, these people have likely experienced, you know, brushes with death many times in their lives, but now they're really confronting the end of their days. Gaspar Noe has cast two people that he really admires, two people that have worked in cinema, a French actress and a film director. And the man here is actually Dario Argento, who, you know, is of course a very famous European art house director, directed of course famously Suspiria. But these two are living in kind of very contained quarters in France, and she has dementia, and, you know, he's fairly okay up here, but, you know, he's very frail just physically. He has heart problems, he's struggling with all kinds of physical ailments, and so is she, of course, naturally, because of old age. But he is writing a book that is about kind of the nature of film and the mechanics of it, and how filmmaking, or how cinema, relates to dreams. And it's kind of his manifesto, I suppose. And also it is the thesis of the film. That is one thing we can say for sure, is Gaspar Noe is very kind of upfront about his thesis typically in his movies. And this one has to do with like the idea of dreams, a dream within a dream, something that he seems to always be trying to grasp. I think this one has just more of a, you know, naturally a more intimate kind of claustrophobia, as I said, and it does remind me more in that sense of a film like Love, which of course he made a few years ago, but it also has more the static bleakness of maybe his first film, I Stand Alone. And I mean that just mainly in terms of tone, but I do feel that this is a reinvention of all of that. And again, it's totally Gaspar Noe. This has his fingerprints all over it. It's absolutely his vision. But it just feels a lot more evolved for him. And I think all of his films are naturally, you know, he's a naturally passionate person, but I think this one is more of an inward, more of a personal experience for him in a way that maybe we are not used to. Maybe because of his own brush with death that he had. And I don't know, this kind of feels like a reset button, this film. And like I said, we are so used to all kinds of really like clunky exposition from somebody like Gaspar Noe, and where he's laying out a thesis. Typically it's like echoes of stuff he might have read in like the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And for somebody that I consider to be less cerebral, more sensory, more in the moment, more everything is more immediate with him, he does still have a love of film academia. That's very clear. And we are used to very meta type of experiences in his movies where, it's like a pastiche of a lot of postmodern films that he really loves. And there are always visual references, very blatant visual references that are being spliced, all throughout his films and just peppered throughout the background, particularly like posters and such. And music, I think Gaspar Noe is one of the best people to incorporate music in his films. And always music is such an important character of the film. It really provides the colors and the kineticism of the piece. It often feels like the driving force of tension. So, I'm thinking what happens here with this type of movie where, all of that he's kind of chucking out the window. There is really no music and all of those typical things that he does. And yet it's all there. As I said, it is all very Noe. He just found a way, I think, to blend those elements seamlessly and maybe a little bit more indirectly. It's all more in the background. So a lot of those elements are not carrying the story forward. It's more just the characters are carrying the story forward, and everything else is more just kind of integrated into the whole experience. When I look at a film like Love, which is probably my least favorite Gaspar Noe film, there is a sense of repetition that is similar to this one. Absolutely, there's a repetitive nature in Vortex, but in Love, to me, it doesn't really lead to anything. It doesn't amount to anything. It just kind of leads to dead ends constantly, and that's very frustrating as a viewer. And also the stakes just aren't really involving. The characters aren't particularly involving. And I don't know, the static quality of it for me was very counterintuitive. It left me cold. To me, Vortex succeeds in every area that Love failed. And yes, like I said, it is repetitive, but it's repetitive in the ways where you can kind of let your mind trail, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because always Noe films are soporific, and yet it somehow contributes to the power of the experience overall. And I have said this before, but I do feel like some of the best films are the kind where you can fall asleep and wake up and still you're connected to the experience, still you're enjoying it in some form. And Noe, being a cinephile at heart, as I said, this is very much an exploration of cinema as a language and kind of coming to terms, I think, with the need to create, especially in the midst of all kinds of pain and destruction and just like this looming threat of mortality. This film is simple, I think, to a fault at times, and it is certainly a slog for sure. And it's like 2.5 hours, maybe more, I can't quite remember, and it lumbers and it grunts and it heaves, and I swear to God, it's like you can experience every creaking bone, every kind of torturous moment for these two old people. And it's not a pleasant experience for sure, and that's certainly part of the point, but I do think part of what makes this film interesting and not just repetitive for the sake of being repetitive is that Noe does have that talent just as a sensationalist. Naturally, it's ingrained in him. And so, through that visual, feeling that he has and that kineticism, I think he can craft something now with this maturity that is more balanced. And, again, it has echoes of all those elements. They're just more integrated in a way that's more mature. And I don't normally use words like mature when I think about Gaspar Noe. I think that Lux Eterna works really well as like a double feature. Watch that film first, just because he uses a particular gimmick in it that he does carry through in Vortex. And it's that very De Palma-esque idea of the split screen. Pretty much the whole movie is told through split screens, and very much the typical thing where you see like a slit in the middle of the screen and you're seeing two different cameras simultaneously, 2 points of view. But for me, that gimmick doesn't necessarily work, I think, as well as it maybe needed to in something like Lux Eterna. I don't know, it created kind of a sense of chaos that was a little bit unfocused, and I don't know, it doesn't really help the tension for me, but I do feel like it fully works in a film like Vortex because the intimacy is the focus. And I think it's just because, everything is smaller. Everything is more like confined in close quarters in a way that really, really helps it. And, the dynamic or lack thereof between the husband and the wife here is very, very important. The split screens really do create that disconnect, but I don't think it's just that. I think it creates a sense of like omniscience. It's very much tied to this idea of voyeurism, and it constantly reminds you that this is a film. Sometimes with the split screen, the two characters are they're in completely different locations, but sometimes they're in the same room. Sometimes they're talking to each other and there is still that split screen. And sometimes it looks like there's almost no difference between, the two splits. And perhaps it's just off enough to feel kind of like a glitch or something. There is one shot in the film, and I can't quite remember what's happening. I think it's like she's sitting in between her husband and her son, and she's like right in the middle, and she kind of rests her head in a way where it's like it's just off enough between the two splits where it looks like there's two of her. It's like a fragment of her, and I don't know, I found that to be a really haunting and really beautiful image, and actually quite trippy in a lot of ways. Part of what makes Noe's film so immersive is that they're very Kubrickian in nature. You know, he loves to follow characters with very controlled cameras in a way that, you know, just feels very three-dimensional. And in this case, you really do feel like you are part of this little apartment with these two people. And just the construction of the way that the apartment is built and everything, it feels like a really small maze, and you can just feel the claustrophobia of it. Just the winding hallways and how they kind of go, they're pacing like in circles and going from one room to the other and back and forth and back and forth. You really do feel, you know, almost like you're kind of going insane, or you feel like a sense of torture. And there's just papers, stacks of papers and books, and like I said, pictures and posters. There's just clutter everywhere, and it kind of reflects this, like, I don't know, like a mental projection. It's like a mental sense of disarray. But I do really like that they bring in the son, you know, the couple's son here to come take care of them. And of course, he has a son of his own. And, you know, I mean, he is an outsider for the audience, but he's also still connected to the family. But he has a very different point of view. And I think, you know, it's important for us to have that perspective, because I think we can relate to him. But the idea of mothers and sons and fathers and sons and all of that, and how that carries through, you know, there are those little Freudian hints, just the cyclical nature of evolution. That's something very fascinating for Gaspar Noe. But again, we're just seeing it here more integrated in a way that is more mature, in ways that are more subtextual. I feel so much for all of the characters in this film, but the Argento character, just as a man, you know, it's just, it's so hard for him. I mean, he's truly in a position that is, like I said, very difficult, but also very relatable. And there is a sense, you can just feel, I think in his performance, a sense that his heart is absolutely breaking. And not, I mean, it's more just kind of due to the natural progression of things. And in his final days, it's almost like we're trying to make sense of the materialism that we cling to, and just the mind, the projections of the psyche onto reality. And of course, you know, Argento does speak about the thesis of his book very clearly. He lays it out all for us, and his feelings about life being like a dream within a dream, and how all of this relates to film and dreams, as I said before. I think this really comes through in that point where Argento decides to start watching that very famous scene from the film Vampire by Carl Dreyer. It's a film that is, I find to be very chilling. The first time I saw it, it just stuck with me from forever. And of course, if you've seen the film, you know it's kind of providing this a sequence, and it is providing a very voyeuristic point of view on one's own death. The tie-in of life and a dream and imagination, reality, existence, life, death. I don't know. I feel like he somehow embodies all of that through the sensory experience, but with simplicity. And I don't know, there's something about that that provides kind of a nice balance. There are all kinds of very cerebral directors, but I like that Gaspar Noé is the type that kind of soaks in everything, kind of embodies, you know, all the things that he's interested in. It is indirect, but I like the idea of the experience kind of becoming the insight, or providing the insight in a different way. Now, the dream stuff, that's all stuff that you can read in like the apparatus theory, which, you know, just Google it and read all about it. The idea of dreams being this projection of our unconscious minds, and it can be very intimate things, or it can just be things that are very random, and it's disguised through all kinds of abstractions, and we often forget that. We forget the power of the subliminal message, I think, just as people. And one thing I think that really ties in dreams to cinema for sure is that dreams are kind of involuntary. You are a spectator. You don't have the control over it. You sit back and you sleep, and it just has to go. And I think whether it is a movie that you're a spectator in, or whether it's your own dreams, I think there's something really profound and interesting you can learn about the idea of being a spectator in this sort of situation. But also, I mean, even just looking at these two people, these two old people, you know, they can't really escape their own bodies. Like, she cannot escape her own body, even though her mind is just completely dissolving. Or with him, you know, it's like he is physically withering away in a way that's really devastating to watch, and yet his mind is sharp. His mind is okay. And that's a similar sort of thing. But dreams within dreams, it feels like each one gets more vivid, and it feels like, you know, the more you go into that rabbit hole, the more truths can kind of reveal themselves to you. But it also can be a haunting reminder of the need to escape as reality and mortality is just kind of slipping through our fingers. And I don't know. I do feel like with Noe, with this type of movie, for all his faults, I think that he's finally recognized that that sensory overload type of approach that he has, while it is wonderful and I am addicted to it, I love it, it is full of opportunities. I think at this point, he's kind of exhausted it somewhat. And I'm not saying he shouldn't return to it because I hope that he does, but I do think that he needed to kind of take a departure and reset, as I said. And maybe now he can approach things a little bit differently. But I don't know, I saw this as a really personal piece and it gave me a new perspective on him, certainly. And I think he has maybe a new perspective on life that he didn't have before. I will say it was a film that took me some time to really figure out what I felt about it. As I was watching it, I wasn't sure how I felt because, like I said, it's not an easy experience, but I think there really is an underlying visceral power that is unrelenting where I felt like I couldn't stop watching. I could just feel the ache of isolation and the clutter, the paranoia. And even though it's like eking forward ever so slowly, there's just something about it that's really emotionally powerful for me. I do think that there is more dimension to be found in old age and melancholia than I think Noe is providing for us here, because I do think one thing that I struggle with is there is always kind of a sense of monotony to Noe narratives, and oftentimes things don't necessarily add up. He's certainly improved, but you know, it still leaves something to be desired for me. But I don't know, something about this film, as I kind of let it mull over, I found myself kind of smiling and I found myself kind of proud of him for sure. I do think finding cinematic beauty in something that might seem uncinematic to a lot of people is kind of what magnifies reality in a really interesting way. And I think he has capitalized on that with just an unrelenting gaze that I really just can't help but admire. And I do think this is one of his more impressive works, one of his best works. But anyway, that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist and I do commission portraits. I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I would like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. If you're interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.